Welcome to the Beyond the Reef podcast, where I talk to experts and researchers in the reef aquarium hobby, discussing a broad range of topics from corals and reef biology to water chemistry and equipment. We take a deep dive into our guests' methods, techniques, and top reef keeping tips. My name is Adam Sutherland, and I am the owner-operator of Frag Garage Corals, based out of British Columbia, Canada. This podcast is now brought to you by Fauna Marine. I was hesitant to bring on any sponsors, but since I use so many Fauna Marine products, I was really happy to have them collaborate with me. And also, I am now a certified ICP consultant, so if you send in a laboratory ICP test, you can select me as an advisor. Hey folks, well, we made it through another year. 2024 was, I think, a great year for reef keeping. Lots of new discussions happening, some great new products, some great new methods, and I thought a good person to talk to was Peter Dinh from Bayarea Reef. And if you don't know Peter, he is a content creator, videographer, photographer. He does some great tutorials on his YouTube channel, so you should definitely check out Bayarea Reef on YouTube. And just in general, he's a great guy and very knowledgeable in all aspects of reefing. So we had a really great chat talking about all the things we've experienced over this past year. I'd like to especially thank everybody that has subscribed to my Patreon this year. That's probably one of the biggest things that's helped support me. And if you are looking for any advice, ICP consulting, anything in that matter, you can go check out my Patreon for the monthly consultation sessions. Or you can also just, if you want to just support me, buy me a beer, buy me a coffee, just kind of make this podcast worthwhile. Also, I'm never going to have any ads pop up in the middle of an episode. It's only ever this little discussion that happens in the beginning, and that's it. And anything further than that, you can check out in the description of the episode below. But I do ask that you hit that subscribe button, like, share this episode, comment in the comments. Also, tell us if you had any experiences this year with any of the things we discussed in this episode. If you want to, leave some comments about that, I'm happy to reply and keep the conversations going. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Peter Dinh from Bayarea Reef. Just a little disclaimer, Peter was a little under the weather for this conversation, so he might sound a little stuffy, and I did a couple edits just to make sure there were no coughs in the audio. Okay, so this is kind of like a year-end review. Welcome to the show. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, so thanks for joining me.
Yeah, great. I've been watching the podcast and happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, so we can do, I guess, year-end review, maybe just talk about things we've experienced and learned this year, maybe some products, stuff like that. I think it's been like an interesting year in reef keeping, probably like most years. It probably ended with more questions than answers.
Yep, most definitely.
Yeah.
Every year there's new products, there's new techniques, methods, and there's also controversy, right?
Yeah.
And
why don't let's talk about the bolus thing for a second, because that's been a bit of a hot topic recently, and I kind of wanted to share my experience with it. I don't know if you've tried it or considered it on any of your tanks.
So I know about it, and I've read up about it, but I haven't personally tried it. My approach to reefing is more of a hybrid approach.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go for one specific type of reefing method. Maybe I'll pull bits and pieces of different methods and kind of combine it into kind of a hybrid approach. But yeah, let's talk about the bolus. And the funny thing is, I actually don't know what it stands for.
Yeah, well, bolus actually just means ball, which I guess is just means like it's essentially is a dose given all at once. So it comes from a medical terminology.
Okay, so like the balling method, or
yeah. So the entire dose of your alkalinity is given at once. And I think one of the misconceptions about this whole thing is that people are saying, well, we used to do this years ago. This isn't a new thing. But one of the things that I think makes it sort of stand out in recent years, and maybe the reason that it's working for some people as well as it is it's the trace elements that are delivered with the alkalinity boost. So they know, I'm saying they know, this is research that's been done at Fauna Marine, and I think through some other, studies to do with, reef water chemistry, is that there's certain elements like halogens that are used when the light period is at its peak. So those are things like fluoride, iodine, strontium, like some of those elements are super utilized right when that light peak happens. So the corals actually get more protection from the light if those
Yeah,
trace
I
elements
think
are
that's
delivered at the same time.
yeah. So we have a better understanding of that now, right? Is that there's been a misconception where alk spikes or inconsistencies in alk could cause damage to your coral. In certain cases, that is true, right? Alk spikes can damage your corals, but I think because of the contribution of the halogens and the pH boosts and all that protects the coral a little bit during that spike. And then you mentioned that we're kind of going back in time, and I think the reason why we're going back in time is because back in the day we didn't have these fancy dosers, right? Where we're timing the doses, and we were just hand dosing and throwing whatever we needed to throw into the tank all at once in the morning or at night when we went to bed.
Yeah, like the time would be less consistent, I would say, too, for sure. It would just, you might miss it before work one day, and then you might just dump it in at the end of the day, you know? It's like, oh, it got done that day. Good job. Yeah.
So I think the one important thing about this bolus method is that you want to hit it right before your photo period, right?
Yeah.
Right before your lights turn on. And what you're essentially doing is you're kind of boosting the pH and the alkalinity at the same time as you're trying to kind of turn on the lights at its highest intensity for a little bit.
Yeah.
And kind of just boost that photo period without a ramp period. You're just literally turning on the lights at that point.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, some of the other criticisms of the bolus method through Fauna Marine is that, they're trying to just sort of sell their product, and you should be able to do it with other products. And I mean, in theory, like, you probably could if the sodium bicarbonate to sodium carbonate ratio was the same as the Fauna. The problem is if you did it with something like, you could probably do it with ESV because ESV is still designed to be able to be done as a bolus dose, but you're going to have much more of a pH spike. And there's something that happens with the bicarbonate when it gets put in that big dose, that it kind of goes into this, like, the excess of it goes into this kind of solution where it's kind of ready to come in and out of the buffer system as required. And that's why some of the sort of testing they've seen on it is kind of seen like, it kind of flatlines over the course of the day, over the photo period. There's this initial big spike in alkalinity, but then the alkalinity kind of hovers in this kind of zone. I haven't experienced it myself because I'm testing my alkalinity 4 times a day. But if you're doing like an alkatronic where you're testing constantly, people actually see this. They call it the tabletop effect, where the alkalinity actually stabilizes throughout the day.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing is bicarbonate, or the reason why they're saying bicarbonate versus like a carbonate solution is that it won't precipitate right away, right? Because when you put a large amount of alk into your tank, or carbonate base like soda ash or something like that, in my experience, it precipitates.
Yeah.
And it's all over the place.
It does. Yeah, yeah. That's a thing they've, I know Claude did some little demonstrations of it by showing, the difference of putting sodium carbonate versus sodium bicarbonate into salt water. And you can see it immediately how it kind of like precipitates, And
there's been like, on the forums, people are talking about, why can't I use carbonate, but not maybe dose it just a little bit. The whole point is to dose it all at once to get that pH boost, right? That's the crux of the method.
It's like you're saying, though, it's like people have this instinct to want to hybridize things, like you see something that's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I'm going to take a little piece of that and apply it to, what I'm already doing. I'm going to keep calc in conjunction with this. But it's like, I don't know, that's when we get a little bit messy. And that's kind of our, I think, maybe more North American style of reefing. We're much more, hybridized. And, like you were saying, like you like to use multiple methods on your systems. And my main SPS system it uses calc, it uses calcium reactor, and it uses 2-part, so it's doing a little bit of everything.
That's exactly, I'm doing calcium reactor, and I'm doing 2-part for the bulk of it, right?
Yeah.
But the thing that we missed talking about was that, we dose this bolus of alk all at once in the morning, but you need to boost that pH and that photo period by turning the intensity of your light higher than it normally is for a brief moment, maybe like 30 minutes to an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you bring it back down to your normal schedule.
Yeah.
And that kind of gives it like a boost where the corals are kind of like in this mode where they're consuming uh, um, all of the traces and the processes that kind of boost it, right?
Yeah. And apparently, the research that's going on right now is talking about how there's a FSS those are the letters you have to remember. So fluoride, sulfur, and strontium. Those are the three elements that seem to be the most related to regulating the growth, and that's going to be super critical during that peak period. So I mean, it's interesting. So I do have some experience with this system now because I did it on I have a smaller system. It's about 150 gallons, and it was on balling light already. So this wasn't like a major change. This system never had calc. It never was on a calcium reactor. It was always just on 2-part. And what I did is I just changed it over to doing the bolus dose instead of doing the 12 hours of dosing or whatever I was doing. And I would say things have improved on that system. Like overall, the pH is really good. It's about 8.1 to 8.4. Let's see. One of the notable things about it actually is corals are a lot more aggressive to each other in the tank. So, yeah. And I was told this before I started the system, and I kind of thought that doesn't really make any sense. But you got to think if a coral is healthier, it's going to produce more. Probably the stinging cells, the nematocysts maybe are more active. And I find that when
more like polyp extension and stuff like that.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that the polyp extension is way better than my other system on that tank. But when corals touch, like they burn each other hardcore. It's not just like, a little bump, like whatever, skins over and grows back. It's like that if you don't move it, that coral's going to have a huge dead spot on it. So yeah. So I wouldn't say necessarily this is a good thing or a bad thing, but it is an indication of health overall, I would say. Yeah.
Now, I talked about like the large alk swings and stuff like that. You haven't seen any effect of those swings? Like, how big are the swings?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And that's actually been one of my biggest takeaways from the system is that I no longer think that elk swings really matter very much. I mean, I think that elk swings matter if the cause of the elk swing was something bad, something really bad, then you're going to blame the elk swing. But sometimes it's the cause, not the effect, if that makes sense. But the elk swings are about between 1 and 1.5 DKH per day. So it might be, my alkalinity might go down to, I would say it's more like maybe more like 7.5 to 8.5 is kind of the range, but it might be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, depending. So that's why I say 1 to 1.5. And even to a point of having my alkalinity run out while I was away for a couple days, and my alkalinity goes down to 5, and I come back. Yeah, I come back, I start my bolus dosing again, get it adjusted. No problems with the tank, no losses, no corals affected whatsoever. So
I've never tested or had the balls to go down that low.
Well, I mean, I did not. It was not my intention, but it was, a valid experiment, unintentional experiment. But I think it goes to show if the corals are healthy, I think they can handle an alkalinity swing here and there. And I think it's like, especially if you're using this system, maybe there's just something to the resilience of the corals where, I don't know, there's like a built-in thing that, they're used to maybe a little bit of variation. So, having maybe a little bit more variation every once in a while is something they can deal with without even sweating it,
Right. And I think another thing that I was reading up on is that pH is super important, right? The level of the pH and the amount or the level that you start with is important. And you can't have it drop too low, or else it kind of, the processes don't get a jump start. And I think that's like somewhere between 8.1 and 8.2 to start with. And they recommend like making sure that you have taken off any of those pH buffers that you may be using, like liquid buffers that are only like temporary. Those aren't recommended, right? So I think that like with my tank, I have a what do you call it? The CO2 reactor.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is that something that we can use with this method, or is it something that is?
I think the idea is that you wouldn't need to use it because, after using the method for long enough, the buffer system, quote unquote, it sort of sorts itself out, and
Right.
you shouldn't need to be scrubbing CO2 out. You actually want CO2 to be in the tank to kind of help the process kind of equalize, essentially.
Right.
But I actually turned off my CO2 scrubbers. Well, I didn't turn them off. I let the media run out about let's see, maybe 2 months ago, and I haven't noticed a huge difference. I feel like maybe just a few little things I changed in the system kind of improved the pH. But I've also just not been chasing pH as much. I honestly don't even really look at it as much as I used to. But yeah, the problem with the CO2 scrubbers is it's like you're kind of on this subscription to buying the media and changing it all the time, and it really doesn't last that long.
It doesn't last a long. I probably get about, at the max, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Out of my CO2 scrubber, and at the 2 week mark, you're already seeing, your pH levels aren't maxing out as much. But as soon as it goes below 8, which is probably at the 3 week mark, I swap it out.
Yeah.
But it's just another one of those things, right, where you have to maintain it and just another piece of equipment.
Yeah. And I did, this was something a guest had mentioned, is that he runs a separate air intake with the T valve on his CO2 scrubber. So it's not taking all the air from the scrubber. It's like half room, half scrubber.
Yeah.
So you get more time out of it that way. And I think that way too, like, because obviously it works really well when you first put it on for like the first 3 or 4 days, and then it kind of peters off.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, I would put that on a product of the year that, well, it's not a new product, but it's a product that I probably am ready to sort of, put in.
I don't think a lot of people have heard about it, right? Because it's something that was kind of new to me this year, thinking about it. But I think for how much stuff that I have and equipment wise on my tank, if I had another build or another system I'm building, I would probably try this method. But I probably wouldn't swap out what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
I did mention that I did a hybrid approach where, I don't ramp my lights anymore. They just turn on at 10 a.m. They just turn on.
Yeah.
And that does, because I find like the pH kind of creeps when you're ramping.
Mm-hmm.
But when you turn on the lights right away, your pH kind of ramps up a little faster.
Yeah.
Which I think is good for the coral.
Yeah. I think one of the sort of points, and I remember talking to Doug about this, was that when you're in a tropical region, from sunset to bright outside, it's actually pretty fast. Yeah. So, obviously, like, the sun's gonna travel across the sky and it's gonna hit like peak points, but like it does get bright pretty fast, and I've been guilty of like having my ramp up be maybe up to 2 hours till it gets to its full, because I kind of enjoy the blue for a couple hours, and then you kind of just see the progression. But I think there's something to that. So even if that is like a hybrid approach to the bolus, or you're just taking a piece of it, that might be one of the things people could probably apply. Yeah.
And it's funny because like that's what we used to do. Like, ramping wasn't a thing until all these controllers came out, right?
Yeah, totally. And even just like even the dimmable T5s, like it was hard on the bulbs, and it just wasn't worth it. I think there's a risk when you talk about any subject, this could be in reef keeping or whatever. If you talk about something with conviction, like you're saying, this is how this works, you're explaining things, you're laying it out like things are facts, versus the language that is more like, this is my experience, I think this could be how it works. When you're saying stuff and you're delivering it in a way where it's factual, you're putting yourself in a position to be, more controversial.
Scrutinized. You're going to get scrutinized by people.
Yeah.
And it's more the fact checking and the sources and the anecdotal stuff, right?
Yeah.
That we're all guilty of that. We all use anecdotal evidence to say that this product or that product works, without any kind of data backing it. But I think there is data backing it. It's just it'll take time for that to come out, right? As the more people are asking the questions, the more of the data will come out, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't like, as far as I know, nobody's tank is crashed from bolus yet. Nobody's
Yeah.
had, it's almost all good experiences, and the other thing is the fact that Doug he doesn't have an educated background in, chemistry or,
Yeah.
biology or any, stuff to do with this. He's just a very, very good researcher. And, that's the way I am too. I don't have an education in any particular background. Like, I have been a professional music producer, studio owner. I never went to school for that. I, produced tons of bands and records and was, had a very good career doing
Yeah,
that.
he's not the only one, right? We
Yeah.
have other companies that have a lot of smart people talking about their products, but they're not scientists. They don't have a scientific background.
But it is
and
like
they come
that.
out saying that, right? They're not hiding the fact.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you say, it's an anecdotal hobby, and a lot of the best, discoveries and information we have is kind of come from hobbyist experience, because we have so much time with our hands in the tank, so much hands-on. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we'll see how things play out with this. It is one of those things where I think people want to see more concrete science. But another thing I know about it, and again, I'm going to try to use the language where I'm speaking more from, this is what I understand about it, is that a lot of the chemistry information, the water chemistry information that exists in the hobby, is not based around closed saltwater systems like our aquariums. It's based around ocean conditions, which are very, very different, and it's based around the way chemistry behaves in freshwater. And
Right.
and it typically is not done specifically on reef aquariums. So, all of those things that are sort of being argued about, I'm not going to say any names or point anything out. I think a lot of it is, it's kind of like the whole, I mentioned this before we started, but Graham Hancock and his research on, all the archaeologists are kind of pissed off at him for, bringing up all these theories about human history. But he's not an archaeologist, he's an author, but he's still got, he's got some stuff probably right, but
using logic,
yeah, exactly.
not scientists, but we use logic at times. We can piece things together and make it work.
I think it's just important for people to keep an open mind, because, new discoveries and new things that, tend to come up, like, they often are controversial when they come up,
Absolutely.
Like,
there's always going to be someone out there that says, that's BS or one or the other. But I think that we have to have these conversations in order for us to move forward in this hobby and to discover new things. If we just listen to one source and just agree with it all the time, then I don't think we're going to be moving forward faster than we should have.
No, totally. Yep. Challenge the norms. And, also, yeah, I think bringing back looking at the past and what worked in the past is also, a good lesson too. Is another, these are very relatable to just human history in general.
Absolutely.
Look at all of human history. Yeah. But,
and a lot of the things, like, we tend to forget about, and then moving fast forward, we bring those topics back up, right? And calc is one of those things. Like, we calc came and then it disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's back. And it's kind of, I don't know, but I don't hear a lot of talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other methods and stuff, but these things come in waves and it comes and goes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's waves because of these kind of conversations, like speaking of which, having Alan Vo on the podcast got a lot of people thinking about coral nutrition and with his whole concoction thing. And there was actually another conversation recently that had me thinking about the concoction. And I should probably see if I can get Jamie Craggs back on, because he would be able to weigh in on this. But, the whole, I guess I'll just summarize the concoction as it's kind of a way of sort of essentially, pre-digesting coral food along with some trace elements to make it sort of more accessible for coral to utilize and potentially use as food. So a lot of people have been sort of trying to make their own versions of this concoction. Alan's been selling the concoction. And then some of the controversy around that is, how safe is this concoction if it's got, this mix of maybe unstable strains of bacteria that could do good or bad things to your tank.
Yeah, we can go down a spiral of talking about bacteria issues, and it's a good leeway into things that we might want to talk about, like
Yeah.
DOCs and stuff like that, and it's all contributing to that. And coral nutrition in general is a hot topic. I think there's products that claim to feed and give corals their color and their growth and stuff like that, but is it snake oil? Is it true? Like it's hard to say.
Yeah, there's a lot of marketing, and I mean, at least with Alan, he's not really trying to, maybe he's making a little bit of money off of it now, but he's not doing it to make money. He's doing it to sort of find a solution for something and to help other hobbyists.
And I think we all kind of tinker, right?
Yeah.
We all kind of tinker to figure out what the best way is, or kind of figure out a new way of doing things. And if it's successful, then we want to share it.
Yeah. Totally. And I did some experiments with, my kind of version of the concoction, and, I'm still actually a little bit unsure, for me and for my corals, like if I need to feed anything. Like I've gone into periods.
That's what I've been saying.
Yeah. I've gone through periods of feeding more, dumping more stuff in the tank. And I kind of think maybe it has led to more bacterial issues in RTN and things like that. I could be wrong, but
yeah, in my experience, when I start messing around with feeding additional stuff, especially when it comes to like aminos and traces and specific things like that it just kind of messes up the whole system.
Yeah.
And we're going back to the thing where like if we're not, anecdotally it might work, but is it really working? I don't know. It's hard to tell. But what I do see is the degradation of my corals. So I'll stop using it, or maybe using one or changing one thing at a time and just waiting over time to see what happens.
Yeah. And the other thing too with this concoction is, what works for Alan's tank may not work for another tank. It's all going to be, highly variable from system to system. But I mean, I do think there's something to this. Yeah, this came up on a recent episode. We were sort of talking about how a coral actually digests food, and it's not like a coral. They're fairly like simple organisms, to an extent. So, does a coral actually need its food source to be broken down? Is it more feeding on bacteria that's already sort of essentially pre-digested these things? And that's maybe why the concoction works better.
And that's the thing, right? When we look at LPS corals, we see them feeding. We physically can see them eating it. But when we're talking about SPS or acras, where you don't physically see a mouth or anything like that, or it's really microscopic, are they even eating any of that stuff? Are they absorbing it rather than eating it? So
I mean, there's a feed response. For sure. Yeah, I mean, you see stuff stick to the polyps, but I don't really see it get taken down if I'm looking really close,
Right.
Yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, it's one of those, another more questions than answers kind of part of the subject for me right now.
When it comes to coral nutrition, for me, I just go back to the basics of what I think naturally occurs. And what I think naturally occurs is photosynthetic corals, just use light, and then the bacteria in your tank that they consume, and maybe the fish poop, and that's it. That's all.
Well, and maybe fish poop is actually the best coral food. Maybe that's essentially what the concoction is trying to emulate. And at the end of the day, if you just feed the fish more and the fish poop more, then you're getting more of that food anyways. Why don't we talk about the DOC stuff a little bit? I think it's another like big question area, but it definitely got me thinking this year. Like Salem's article was, I think, really well laid out as a good sort of starting point, thinking point, and it got me to try some stuff. Did you try any stuff to kind of clear up essentially your water clarity?
I mean, DOCs come in the forms of a bunch of stuff that we add to our tanks, right?
Yeah, even aminos. Yeah,
food. I do carbon dosing, so that's adding to the DOCs, and then there's a bunch of other things too. But for the most part, I don't test for it, and I never have. And I think there are a few things that you can do nowadays with ICP and a different form of testing where you can get that information and see if your if you're improving your DOCs or if it's elevated or going up. And maybe at those spikes when they're going up, you see issues in your tank. And at times when DOCs are low, you don't see as much things going on with your tank. But for me, I just don't I don't see myself doing a lot of DOC testing, but as more data comes out, I'm interested in it, and it's something that I'm continuously learning myself as I go along.
Yeah. Are you doing regular ICPs on your main
I
system?
do.
Yeah.
I do because I do the moonshine method on my tank, so I do routine ICP tests, but I don't go and add those extra tests. And I think that you mentioned to me the SAK 254 or something that's available now for some of the vendors, ICP vendors.
Yeah. So Oceamo has the 254, the SAC 254 included in their test now. And then with Fauna Marine, you can pay, I think it's like maybe $5 or $10 more you pay to get that
added on. Is that included in
on
their normal test?
It's on their total ICP.
Or is it available on the mass spec version?
It's on the total ICP. So, but Fauna doesn't have, they don't have MS. They just have OES, but they are adding MS for some of the elements, as far as I understand. So that'll be another add-on. But okay, so you obviously have seen your SAC 254 reading on your tank from recent
moonshine. I don't know off the top of my head what that, or did I just skip through it? I didn't even bother to even think about it.
Well, maybe
because I go straight to the trace elements and then that's it.
Yeah, and maybe it was in range, so you didn't see a flag there or anything, so you just kind of moved past it. Yeah. Well, I can say from my experience, I did okay. And just to be clear, this SAC 254 or SAK 254, I'm assuming they're the same. It's just a wavelength of light that is measured that goes through your sample, and it's measuring a certain range of DOCs. It's not going to be your complete range of DOCs. It's just the ones that happen to be hit by this.
Things are reactive to UV, right?
Yeah.
And then it pops up on the test.
Yeah. So I did one maybe 3 months ago, and my reading was around 12, which I think the range is like 2 to 6 or something. Like 12 is kind of getting kind of up there. Like, I don't know if it's, I don't know what we're going to call danger range, but I'm going to say that, maybe that's an elevated enough level that perhaps in theory maybe some of these bad guy bacterias are being supported by it. I'm not sure, but either way, I made some little changes to try to get it down, and that was doing smaller, more regular water changes. So I went from doing maybe 20% a month to every month and a half to doing 10% every 2 weeks. So really almost the same amount of water being changed, just being changed more often. And I started running activated carbon more regularly too. So changing that out. Maybe for a while I was doing it once a week, and then I kind of switched to every 2 weeks. Not a huge amount of carbon, but just, enough to, see some clarity changes. And the next time I did my test was maybe a month and a half, 2 months later, and I got a reading of 4. So
what type of carbon are you? You're using GAC carbon, but specific brand or anything? I've stopped using carbon completely.
Yeah, I had for a long time, and I think talking to a few people, it seems like maybe it is something we should use. I mean, it is going to mess with some trace elements a little bit, so
that's why I stopped using it.
Yeah, but even just using a small amount, I haven't really noticed. The ones that were low before are still low when my tests come up, so it hasn't gotten any worse. So
I'm always low on fluorine for some reason.
Yeah. And I mean, just speaking of, we were talking about calc and, some of its effects. There's an argument that calc really messes with fluorine. But honestly, I just think in a really heavily stocked system, especially with a lot of SPS, you're going to go through a lot of fluorine. Right. It's just, it's just an element that just gets used by corals like crazy.
I kept it low before, like without fixing it.
Yeah.
First, and the tank seems to be okay. And then when I do try to bring it back to a suggested level, I honestly don't see a difference.
Oh, really?
But so I guess
that's an element where I actually could say I probably have seen the biggest difference, getting the level into range. It was specifically blue, anything with a blue edge or a blue tip, like that, those blues just went from, if your fluoride level was, say, maybe, I don't know, let's say point 0.6 to point 0.8 or something, it would be like, that's kind of on the low side. If you get it above 1, 1 to 1.4, you're going to start to see a lot more blue.
Yeah, sure. I'm probably going to elevate it a little bit soon here, but I just got to be very careful with fluorine too, because I've had situations where I put too much fluorine in, and it's not good either.
Well, it's a thing that actually, I think this is something that came from Andre, is that it can actually damage corals in a way that seems to actually mess up their biological processes, where you actually can't really get them to recover.
Yeah,
once you've gone too
I've been
far.
through it.
Yeah.
If you dose too much of it, it's like a very slow death, like over time.
Mm-hmm.
They just shut down and they start fading away.
Yeah. It's a weird thing. I think I have experienced that as well. And like anything in this hobby, when a coral starts going sideways, you're kind of like, oh, could it have been this? Could it have been this? But yeah, I think that makes sense. And maybe with fluoride too, like just dose a lot slower than what the instructions say you can do it by. Yeah. Because
when I first started the method, I was just listening to the instructions and dosing what was told. But over time, as you start using the method and you get used to it, it's definitely, there's a little bit of leeway that you don't have to follow directions to the T.
Yeah. Yeah, because if the level has been low for this much time, X amount of time, let's say it's been low for 3 months, what's the reason that you need to get it back into range in 4 days?
Right.
Why can't you get it back into range in 2 months? Like,
right.
Just go
That's
extra.
The safe way.
Yeah.
It's honestly the much safer way.
Yeah. And then I guess the other component to it is like, we have to question sometimes how accurate is the testing of all of these elements. It's like this is a pretty good representation, but OES and MS ICPs, they have pros and cons. There's certain things that are actually, I think fluoride is tested in a whole other machine, but either way, I mean, there's always going to be discrepancies in any of these systems, is so I think actually that's one of the reasons I think Fauna Marine is adding the MS, but I think the MS is just for certain metals, and they're still using the OES for some of the major elements, because the major elements are still better tested with those.
I think the granularity is not there yet with OS. It's the MS that you get the what they call the dailies in the Moonshiner method. I think it's like manganese, iron, cobalt, stuff like that. Then that you actually it actually registers a reading so that you can get more precise with your dosing.
Exactly. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see if more companies are sort of adding this MS and hybridizing, because, I mean, maybe we do get a little bit carried away with adding trace elements, it's probably always going to be better to be under on a lot of levels than it is to be over.
I believe so too. And those levels are kind of like we all came up with a standard, right? Where those levels are too much, kill your corals, and too little, it might damage them as well. But finding some type of medium in between those numbers would be a safe bet, because over my experience, when I'm dosing something, I've always dosed like a quarter of what's recommended, and I move extremely slow, because I can't, with a tank full of SPS, I can't risk making a change fast and having the whole tank crash.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, so speaking of things changing fast, something I think about sometimes that maybe goes against that theory is like when you get a frag from someone else's tank, or some frags from a coral farmer or vendor, sure, like, we don't really acclimatize corals. You might have your method of quarantining or whatever, but guaranteed that person's water chemistry from a trace element perspective, minor trace element perspective, and maybe some of the major elements, is going to be very, very different than yours.
Absolutely.
So
and that's why we see a lot of death, right?
Yeah.
We see a lot of death in the hobby, because we're buying corals from systems that are far from your parameters.
Yeah.
And when we throw them in, they RTN overnight.
I mean, it can happen, but then also sometimes, I'll get a bunch of corals from someone and, they're 100% fine because I know that system is like a healthy
Yeah,
system.
and this is just there's just so many types of corals and their sensitivity levels and all that stuff too.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah, I guess another thing too is I feel like over the last year, maybe it's a little more widely agreed upon this reefers ratio when it comes to nutrients. So like 10-1 nitrate to phosphate is kind of I think most people are using that as the sort of rule of thumb now.
Baseline, was it 10-1 or was it 100?
100-1, but it seems like it can be 100-1 up to 10-1. Like I recall talking to Lou from Fauna Marine or Tropic Marine about it, and he's saying, maybe a little bit on the higher side. Maybe also the Coral Garden guy. He was saying I think 10-1 was kind of his preference too. So, but yeah, I probably have had the best success in my systems just trying to shoot for that 100-1. So. My nitrates are around 10, my phosphates around 0.1.
Yeah, that's about what I have it at too, and it fluctuates here and there.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think nutrients are key to having a successful reef tank. Like we used to not think about it, but my nutrient levels, if I keep them consistent enough, I definitely see my corals growing much faster.
Yeah.
If you get them out of whack, I mean, it won't kill your corals, but you don't see the growth.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and if the phosphate gets too high, I think you really start to see, slowing in growth. If you get that inverted ratio. But nitrates have been something that I do really have to work to get a reading on, and I guess that brings us to kind of maybe talking about dosing ammonia, because that's something I implemented.
That's new. That's new to me.
Yeah.
In terms of a new method, but in theory, it should work, right?
Yeah.
That's something the corals can more readily consume, rather than dosing all these nitrate solutions where I don't think they're in a consumable form.
No, the coral basically has to use another process it has to do its own chemistry again to sort of make nitrates usable. So, so my experience was I just switched straight from dosing nitrate, I guess it was sodium nitrate, just straight to dosing ammonia bicarbonate. And this is based on Mike Paletta's recommendation. And I started pretty conservatively and upped my dose over time, just doing 4 small doses a day. So they're sort of spread out during your photo period. And it took me a while to even get much of a nitrate reading from it, but eventually you do, because, I think that, I think a lot of the organisms in our tank can utilize this ammonia a lot faster. And, any excess that doesn't get used is going to get converted. Yeah.
So you're saying that you don't see a reading because what you're dosing is mostly getting consumed rather than being converted.
Yeah, and I'm not worried about the fact that maybe my nitrates might read at 1 or 2, one day.
Yeah.
I try to get them a little higher, but a reading of 10 is really just showing you that you've got excess, I suppose. But it's maybe not. Well, okay. I guess there's also the argument to be said that nitrate and phosphate should still be in that ratio. Because everything in our tanks is kind of ratios and relationships.
Right.
So I don't know. But my experience was that my corals, stayed rich looking. And also I noticed less problem algae. So less film algae, less sort of like...
and that's most people's issues, right? They start, when nutrient levels are low, they start dosing all of these... products that bring them up, but I think the only thing that consumes them is algae, not corals.
Yeah.
So you start getting an algae outbreak, and then that just kind of snowballs into other issues.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely interested. I think after this new year, I'm going to experiment with the ammonia dosing in one of my tanks in the garage where I have a couple of test systems.
Yeah, it's definitely not scary. I can tell you that much. It's not a scary method to try, and it's cheap. Like,
Right.
you can get, a 1 kilo bag of it on Amazon for $30 or something
Honestly,
like
the
that.
only thing that I would figure that ammonia would affect is probably your fish and your inverts, right? If you're
Yeah.
dosing small amounts of it and they're getting consumed fast enough where it's not detrimental to them,
Yeah.
it should be fine.
I mean, I would say that it's not the right choice for a tank that's brand new, that has low nutrients. I think if a tank is brand new and it has low nutrients, you should probably skim less. Don't run things like a filter roller, feed more,
Yeah.
add more fish, just try to get, like, you have to get biology happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's a good topic
Yeah.
because when I'm building new tanks or I'm helping someone set up a new tank, the first thing we think about is cycling it, right? But we don't talk about the nutrients. So the nutrients are technically at zero.
Hmm.
So I tend to start a tank by nutrient dosing it almost immediately, especially phosphate. If you are adding corals in a short period of time, right? So I use products where I dose the phosphates up to a certain level, even in a brand new tank. And I've been able to add corals and add a lot of things in a fairly short amount of time and not having an impact where I'm growing all sorts of crazy algae or something in that tank.
Yeah.
But yeah, I truly believe in even carbon dosing a brand new tank, and people are kind of shying away from that too. And that's another controversy. Like I tend to make sure that the tank has all the right nutrients before adding anything.
Yeah. Would you, like, with these systems you're talking about sort of helping along, would they be started with some live rock from established systems, or like what kind of sort of foundation?
It's always beneficial to start with cycled material from another mature tank, right?
Yeah.
But the problem with that is, are you introducing anything from a different tank into the new tank? And that's why it kind of pushes away most people from doing that, or taking a piece of rock from your buddy's tank. You don't know what's on that or whatever you're bringing into your system. So a lot of people start with dry rock, and I think that's fine as well. It just takes a little bit longer
Yeah.
for it to mature.
I'm afraid of that. I mean, I don't know if I would be a successful hobbyist starting a tank from dry. Like, I think I could figure it out,
For
but
SPS,
yeah.
probably not.
Yeah.
For SPS, it just takes so long for an SPS tank to mature that you just have to get live rock or mature rock from somewhere to start your tank.
Yeah.
Or else you'll be waiting 2 years
Yeah.
before you're successful.
Yeah, and maybe some of the bacteria that's good bacteria that eventually gets in is actually just on the coral's tissue. It's
Right.
or maybe on a frag plug,
Yep.
depending on how you're introducing stuff. But yeah.
The funny thing is, like, I just, like, back in the days, like, if I add corals faster, my tank might mature faster. But you're risking killing those corals
Well,
to get beneficial bacteria from it.
I kind of think that, that's something I've recommended to people is just, if you can get some big dumb corals in your tank quickly, you've got, that's, like I say, you're getting the biology going. Like, I've got, it's kind of funny. It's some kind of chalice. It's like the Raja Rampage kind of chalice, but it's like a mycelium kind of, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just grows in this just stupid big plate. So I put it against the wall of the back of one of my frag tanks, and it's like probably, 2 feet by 1.5 feet now. But that would be a perfect coral to just put in somebody's tank to just like get it going. Cause like, I don't care, if it died, it's not a big deal. It's a weed.
Right. It grows super fast.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I've got a lot of corals like that right now. This is a kind of a point I'm at where I'm just like, what do I do with some of these corals? Like, they're just, they're almost costing me to keep them because they're using my real estate in my, farm systems.
So the thing is, I bought one of these like 100-gallon like Rubbermaid tubs that I permanently keep in my garage, and at any given point, it has about 150 to 200 pounds of rock in there, just simmering. and it's been simmering there for over 2 years now.
Yeah.
And so whenever I help a friend or set up my own new tanks, I'll always pull from that tub, and then I'll replace it right away.
Yeah.
And so I'll always have a backup kind of, I would call it live rock, but like not from the ocean.
Yeah. And that I bet that tub probably doesn't have the salinity super consistent on it or anything like that. Nobody's tub is the best.
Yeah, and it's probably like more of a cryptic sump scenario where there's no light and there's nothing in there. It's growing all sorts of things.
Yeah. You know what actually I do is I have a rock tub very similar. It's like a 60-gallon barrel that's full of rock. And I mean, sometimes I sell a bit of the rock. Sometimes I'll need a piece of rock for something, so I'll pull it out of there. But I actually rinse my food in it in a net, so it always gets a little bit of nutrients from me rinsing my food. So I guess that gives, maybe helps the bacteria populations a little bit. But it's a funny thing to kind of keep a tub alive. I think maybe us hardcore reefers probably all have something like that going on.
Yeah, I think it's crucial, and it's one of those things where it's just space, right? Yeah, not everyone has the space for it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I'm guilty of, and I can't help myself when I have a tank shut down, a friend of mine shutting down, or I see some live rock for cheap, and it's real live rock. I'll buy it and I'll try to keep it alive if I can, because
that's funny that I recently helped a friend break down their tank, and their rocks were full of pests, like Aptasia and all sorts of. The nice thing about putting that in the tub and mixing it with all the other stuff is like I can spot treat those with whatever treatment that I need to treat them with, and they'll be nice, clean rock after a while. Like if a rock is full of Aptasia, I'll just throw it in a tub with like 20 peppermint shrimp. Yeah, and they'll take care of it in a week.
I mean, the other thing you could do with that tub too is go hypersalinity or hyposalinity, and probably the bacteria populations will live, but hopefully those Aptasia will die. But I think we can agree Aptasia are the cockroaches of the reef hobby.
100%. I left a bucket in my garage for like a month. Yeah. And I opened it back up and there's still Aptasia growing and living.
Yeah. Crazy. And maybe the salinity is like 1.05 or something. Yeah.
And the temperatures are like super low. They'll live in any condition, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I guess another note we had here was to talk about where things are at with this bacteria testing and aquabiomics and stuff like that. Have you sent off a test for that yet?
I have not.
No. Okay. I haven't either. Yeah,
I should too, because I had at one point a spout of like brown jelly and other things that I just couldn't explain. So I'm curious to see the results from it. I just don't know what to do with those results. Is the thing.
Yeah, I think that is kind of the question for most people. And, having Andy on the show, who's kind of the number one user of the product, he was able to sort of take some information from doing it, multiple times and really seeing how his actions affected the results. Right. And he did end up with better results, in his tank. And I think it looks like his reef tank looks better than ever. And, so some of those takeaways are good. I mean, I want to support the service, but I'm more likely to see someone like Andy do what he did and then just copy what he did rather than do all the testing.
Right. The thing is, like, if your test comes back with something like a pathogen or something that's high in your tank, like, well, what do I do to rectify that?
Yeah. Well, I think the more information they get and they intake when they take these samples in is going to give, more maybe recommendations based on, what you see. But, my takeaway from Andy was it sounds like for, a stocked, established reef, a filter roller is a really, really good thing for controlling some of the populations. And then also water changes. And it's funny because you think doing water changes, well, you're just adding water that has nothing has no bacteria, but let's say it is very low bacteria population. But maybe adding those more regular water changes is allowing more space for those sort of good guy bacterias to populate and, maybe become more dominant.
And it's hard to tell, right? Well, what are the good versus bad bacteria? Right now, we're just kind of doing it and seeing what comes out of it. I used to use Cipro a lot.
Yeah.
The Cipro pills, and they just become super hard to find.
Yeah.
I think it's easy in Canada, but over here, I think they lock down on purchases of Cipro without a prescription. And we used to buy Cipro by like 100-pill bottles, right, for $30. And then all of a sudden you're getting like $150 for 30 pills. It's insane.
Oh, crazy. Yeah. I'm still able to get it, through, physician friends of mine, but it's a weird thing. I mean, I think it is a dangerous thing to be messing around with, especially something that is used actively, for human health,
Right.
Yeah. But Cipro does fix some problems. Like I hate saying that I used it, but I did use it on, one of my systems, and
like in tank or
in
separately?
tank. Yeah. And it was a 10-day treatment. I think it's something like 500 milligram pill per 100 gallons at night for 10 days every second day. And that solved some of these dark coral issues that I had. I had some of these acros, like the vivid confetti, strawberry shortcake, some of those, they just essentially had gone almost black, like deep dark colors.
Crazy. Yeah, I used to use it a lot, right? And I do more than 10 days. And I figured that even after the 10 days or the treatment, they recommend you to do like a large water change. I don't even do the water change. I just let it ride.
Yeah. But yeah, it does pose that question of, is like, putting your hands in the tank when it has active Cipro in it. Is that something that's, are you getting an immunity to that drug? Like, I don't know, it's all just kind of stuff, maybe we should try to not mess with, but in some cases it's hard to have better solutions to some of these, some of these problems are really, really hard to figure out. So we just hit it with the blowtorch.
Yeah. I did that for a while, and then after the tank kind of got better, I stopped. And now if I see any kind of issues, I do spot treatments where I take that piece out and I treat it in another smaller tank. But yeah, I stopped doing Cipro in tank. It gave the tank kind of like a yellowish tint. I don't know if you
weird. No, I didn't notice that.
But like after using it for a while, like there was just this permanent yellow tint in the tank, and I just couldn't get rid of it. And then finally I stopped using it, and it went away.
I wonder if, maybe it wasn't necessarily a yellow tint that was being added, but it was a yellow tint that was not being taken away from a strain of bacteria that would have been, in the water column. That would maybe make more sense. But I think there's applications for all of these things. But obviously hobbyists in Europe don't really have some of these tools, and they find ways to get around it. And I think it's maybe like you were saying, like you're not messing with your tanks as much as you used to. Like you're not adding as much stuff. Right. You've kind of maybe stepped back a little bit. And maybe that's part of it. Things like amino acids might be contributing to some of these bacterial issues too, right?
Yeah. And I just I love tinkering with stuff, and I used to tinker with this tank all the time, and that this tank would go into like a roller coaster ride of negatives and positives until now. I don't mess with this tank anymore. It just kind of is on autopilot. It's the other tanks that I kind of play around with now to figure out new methods and stuff.
Yeah, better to experiment with the smaller systems. But yeah, the tank's looking awesome, by the way. I took a look at some of the videos and pics you sent me, and
thanks.
And, it's awesome. Actually, maybe at some point we can do this as a separate thing, but I'll get you to do a little like tank feature video with me. Like I did that one before. It's actually my most popular video, which is funny because it wasn't, these podcasts are kind of like my passion, but doing a tank feature is kind of fun too. But if you want to do that,
those are always fun. Cool. I always watch the ones that have tank features because you kind of want to know what people run in their tank and how successful.
Yeah, but this is these conversations are much more of a deep dive. I don't know. Maybe for some people they just want the just get to the goods. But this is the ramble sessions over here. Anyways, let's get back to it here. So we were talking about bacteria, aquabiomics. I was
a
gonna,
little bit DOCs.
yeah, I was gonna talk a little bit about salt, my experience with different salt brands over the last year, because I kind of, I still am gonna go back to something I said a couple of years ago, is that, you know, you're not gonna see a massive difference from any salt. You know, some of them are probably gonna be mixed better. Some of them might have a little better profile of trace elements, but you know,
Right.
your tank's not going to be like reinvented by switching salt brands.
No,
So,
and I
you know,
there's a spreadsheet out on the
yeah,
internet that someone has ICP or
yeah,
got their own ICP tests on like all these salt brands. And you're right, for the most part, the only differences are probably like traces, maybe. Like some salts have more traces than others, and other additives that they add in there. But
yeah.
I used every salt that is available
You've been through all of them.
in my
Yeah,
lifetime of reefing here, and I've never felt that there was one salt that was better than the other, except for its price. But I do believe that there are salts that today have added benefits, like a probiotic or something like that, that you might want or need for specific use cases. But for the most part, I think salt, you know, is getting pretty expensive now as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
Like the same amount of salt that I used maybe 5 years ago is probably, I would say, almost doubled in price for a specific brand.
That's crazy. What can you say? Which brand or?
I think Tropic Marin was one of them.
Yeah, yeah,
That got really expensive. I used to get those for like $70 or something. Now they're
yeah.
over 110, 120 US.
Yeah,
But,
that's pretty crazy. Yeah, yeah. So I can talk about the different salt brands I tried and, you know, my experience. So off the top of my head, I guess there's been 4 different brands. So okay, so I started the year on Tropic Marine, but what the supplier didn't tell me, who sold it to me, I'm a little bit bitter about this, is that he was selling me like a commercial version of it, and
Yeah.
it's not quite the same because the magnesium is in flakes and it's not broken down in the same way, and you're actually supposed to mix the entire bag at once, and it's 260 gallons or something per bag.
Right.
So I don't have the station to mix that volume. So I have been doing smaller water changes, maybe mixing 60 gallons at a time.
Yeah.
And I think the system was doing quite well on it. And then one time I did a water change, wasn't even a big one. It was probably 10 or 15%. The tank went really downhill after that. And I'm not saying this is a Tropic Marine thing. I think it was a composition of the mix that did something. And this was late last year. No, maybe it was in the spring this year. Yeah, it was maybe around March this year. And honestly, my system has not been as good ever since. So
Really?
yeah, so that's why I'm a little bit bitter at the supplier for not being transparent with me about, you know, the salt. But I do think the salt was a good product. I mean, it mixed like super, super fast. You know, my ICPs were pretty good based around that. So,
Yeah.
you know,
The only thing that I would say is like use a salt that matches your parameters.
yeah,
You
yeah,
don't have the kind of shock when you're doing water changes.
yeah,
And that's the only reason why I choose certain salts over. I use neomarine salt, and it matches the parameters perfectly, and it mixes pretty clear.
yeah.
and
Okay.
fast.
Well, that's another one. So I did use Brightwell, the Neomarine, a couple years ago was my main salt, and then I actually still had a 300-gallon box of it. So I went and after the Tropic Marine, I switched to the Neomarine, and tank seemed pretty good with that. But I did find the alkalinity was a little bit low on that salt. Yeah.
It's low, and
Yeah.
I run my tanks in the 7s to mid 7s.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Was there any like specific sort of, you know, just trial and error that kind of brought you down to that range? You found the tank did better, a little lower?
I found that it just gave me more kind of natural seawater levels,
Mhm.
and I always felt that why don't we match what it is out in the ocean? And so I kind of stuck to that thought process, and that's where it landed me.
Yeah, so like 7 to 7.5, something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but Neomarine does mix low for sure.
Yeah, it mixes low, and I think the magnesium was fairly high in that salt, as I recall.
it's like
14, yeah,
1400.
something like that, yeah, which is good. But yeah, so that salt. One funny thing I noticed with the Brightwell is that it smells when you mix it.
Yeah,
There's a
it's like
weird
an
smell.
anhydrous. It's like a sulfur.
I think
kind
what
of
it is
smells good.
I think it's like you know how like Prime like that Prime product that's like a
Mhm.
dechlorinizer. I think they put
Yeah,
a little bit of something like that in there because that Prime stuff has that skunky smell too. I think
I,
it's just,
I
you
heard.
know,
Yeah, I'll have to ask them. They did give me an answer, but I can't remember what the answer was.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, they admit to the smell.
yeah,
But it doesn't have any adverse effects or anything. It just
yeah,
has a little bit of a sulfur smell.
yeah, yeah. Okay, and then the other salt I tried was, and I had been back and forth on this, was the Red Sea Blue Bucket, which mixed a little too low for alkalinity. So then I started mixing the Blue Bucket and the Black Bucket together
Yeah,
in a ratio that gave me the alkalinity and the range I wanted. And I
yeah,
was actually really happy with Red Sea. Like, honestly, to me, I felt like it mixed really well. And I also thought the price point was really good. The availability was good. The magnesium was very low on the Blue Bucket. So I had to add a lot more magnesium to my tank. So that was probably the con of
do you
that one.
buffer your salt before you do water changes, or you just use
Um,
it as is?
I mean, sometimes maybe, let me think here. I do add nitrates and phosphates to my water change water. So I try to get it
Oh,
to the 10-to-1 ratio. Yeah.
okay,
Unless I'm specifically trying to get the nutrients down in a tank. But if my
right,
systems are where I want them to be, or even if the nutrients are a little low, I don't want to do a water change and lower them even more than they were already down.
right.
So I just do the calculations on that and just put
Yeah.
it directly into the
I
water.
find that like a tank that's flush full of SPS corals is constantly consuming nutrients
Yeah.
a lot faster. So it's easier to keep those tanks low than it is high.
Yeah, totally. So you might as well just add a little bit to your water change water. I actually have
Yep.
2 more salts to talk about. I tried 5 salts this year.
Oh,
Yeah, it keeps going. So the next one was I tried the fauna marine salt. And I would say, as far as like mixing and quality, it's probably the best salt I've ever used.
okay.
I'm not saying this because Fauna sponsors the podcast. It just
I was like,
it
are you saying?
it mixes so fast. It's incredible how fast it mixes.
Yeah.
And the ranges are really good in it too. And then you can look it up and see what the parameters of it are
I used to
online.
love Tropic Marin. Tropic
Yeah.
Marin used to mix
Yeah.
super fast and super clear to me.
Yeah, the Tropic
Uh,
Marin, I would say very similar. I would say maybe almost the same as far as mixing. I just had
yeah,
that bad experience with the commercial bags, so I can't speak to the like normal consumer bucket of
right.
it. But yeah, definitely good stuff. I mean, I think because they're all produced in Germany, they're probably maybe even done in the same factory, you know, and
Yeah,
like who knows, right?
yeah. I think Nios came out with a salt that is pretty good too
Yeah, I've heard really
this
good
year.
things
I
about the
don't know if it's
Nios.
this year or last year, but it's pretty new.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be nice to give the Nios a try. You know, the thing is that like, you know, a lot of these salts are coming from, you know, across the world, and it's a heavy
Yeah,
product. And, you know, even though maybe we can afford to ship them and have all this transportation done, it would be great if there was salt manufacturing that was closer to home and affordable.
yeah. On the North American side, it's just I guess the material and all the additives
Hmm.
are a little bit easier and cheaper to source outside of North America, so that's why most of those salts are
Yeah.
made elsewhere.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, one thing that would be, like, I think a good example is the Captivate salt is, you know, the majority of the weight of your salt is sodium chloride. So, he has multi parts that you put together, and I think it's the same with the ESV salt. But if we could just get farmer grade sodium chloride locally in bulk,
Make it ourselves.
then we could add all the other components, because it's, you know,
Yeah,
if you look at the amount of trace elements that is in, let's say 60 gallons of salt water you make up, it's not very much.
yeah,
It's probably like
yeah.
a few mils or whatever, or the minor
Like,
trace,
I mean, the Captivate salt is interesting to me because I mean you can reach out to them and have them kind of customize
Hmm.
specific blend for your specific needs. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, Totally. Yeah, so the next water change I did, and this is just recent, I've done two now with reef crystals. Because looking at, I was thinking about what all my guests that I've had this year that are sort of real hardcore coral farmer, aquaculture people. A lot of them were using Instant Ocean and reef crystals.
Yeah.
I would say at least half. So I tried a water change with reef crystals, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and then I did another one a couple days ago. And I don't know, it seemed fine. Nothing bad happened.
I honestly, the world's biggest aquariums, public aquariums, are using, reef crystals or IO.
Yeah.
They have a track record.
Yeah.
Being around forever. And I think the most important aspect of any salt is that it's consistent throughout its manufacturing process, right? That there's no difference in batch A to batch, Z.
I think that's one of the cons maybe that people might say against Instant Ocean, though, is that they'll see more variance. But maybe if you're going to use a cheaper salt, just take that little bit of extra time and get out your Salifert kit and test at least the alkalinity and the calcium in when you make a batch of salt to a water change. It's really not that much time. And, also if you get a reading of calcium on your IO that's kind of low, say it's like 370, because I've seen it be 370, just add some calcium chloride. It's super easy.
Buffer it a little bit.
Yeah, just do a quick calculation and add it, and then there you go. You just
doctor. Now, my question to you is: are you continuing to use reef crystals, or are you switching the fauna?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can really get a good idea of what a salt is going to do unless you give it about 3 months. So this is what I've done with all of these salts. They've all gotten about 3 months each, and like the fauna marine probably got about 8 water changes or something like that, 6 to 8 water changes. I feel like that's enough to kind of see how that is reflected in your ICP, just overall general health related stuff. But
right.
Yeah, I'll give the reef crystals a little bit of time. I just remember Sabella fella saying that, or Chris Sabella, he was saying that it was the only salt that he ever was like, I noticed a difference like right away after doing a water change.
Maybe the boost of extra traces or something like that.
I don't know, and then this was an interesting point that Rudy from Golden Basket made, was that maybe some of the salts that are cheaper that actually have a little bit less trace elements are better to use with a system that's on something like Moonshiners or
exactly, because you don't want to mess with that ratio.
Yeah, and if something is giving you a reading that is maybe not super accurate, if there's a reading that's not super accurate coming in on your ICP, then you're not going to be over on something when you do that water change. You're just going to be,
Neutral.
Yeah. I wish I had brought up that doc with all of the comparisons of salts, but I'll look at that some other time. I'll put a link in the description and people can check it out if they want to get more into that. But my takeaway of trying 5 different salts is that none of them really made any massive differences. So pick one that you like the parameters on and that you like how it mixes. If it mixes clean, and if it doesn't mix clean and it's just in your price range, right. A trick is to pour the salt into a filter sock as you add it into your mixing station. I thought
Absolutely.
That was
I think that takeaway is probably what I come to a conclusion with over the years.
Yeah.
So like with me, just having the availability of that salt too, right? Mm-hmm. Making sure that you can go grab it. And a lot of people just switch salts with like no impact to their tank.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really ever notice anything bad from switching brands, but
are you doing it like gradually, or is it just like a cold?
I mean, it's a 10% water change, so like I don't think that's enough to, it's all emulating salt water. So like, like how different is it going to be from a salt to a salt? Like, that being said, could you mix 2 brands of salt with each other in the same water, change water?
I've done that before.
I feel like you could. I mean,
I've done that before when I was, a beginner reaper where I'm not spending money on another bag of salt. Why not just mix these two
Yeah,
together?
yeah, because you're running out of one and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
yeah. But I mean, how different is that from our reef tank? I mean, maybe there's certain chemical reactions happening when a salt is initially mixed that you should just let it do its thing and you shouldn't add a
it's true.
different,
I mean, neomarine, for instance, it gets really hot, like
yeah,
super hot.
yeah.
If you have salt on your hand
Hmm.
and you kind of put it in water, it technically could burn you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because as far as I know, I think it's the neomarine and the tropic marine that are the two fully synthetic salts, and then a lot of other salts on the market are essentially evaporated salt water.
Yeah, they call it like anhydrous or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. Actually, just another little note I should mention that is maybe becoming a little bit more of an important known thing in reef tanks. And I noticed that I mentioned this with the FSS thing, the fluoride, sulfur, strontium.
Yeah.
Sulfur is a thing that I think has been overlooked and that we might see more information on coming in the following year. We know that sulfate is a big part of our salinity. Obviously, sulfate and chloride are kind of two of the major other components, but it sounds like sulfur and sulfate are different forms of the same element. But
Yeah.
sulfur seems to have something to do with this acid regulation and growth. So I don't think that sulfur is on the Oceamo ICP, but it
S.
is. But it might just be S, but S being sulfur, not sulfate.
Uh,
Um,
yeah, I'm not quite sure either. Yeah, but maybe if we get more information in the future, it's something that piques my interest.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's some discussion about high sulfur readings could actually help with coral pests, but not
Really?
other corals. Yeah, so I'm not I can't
That's
say anything
something I
about it
wanna
at this
look into.
point. But this, yeah. Let's maybe steer into this coral pest thing to do with aquaporating flatworms and fenbendazole or fenben flakes.
This is an interesting topic.
Yeah. And I actually talked about this maybe about 2 years ago. I mentioned that fenbendazole kills acro-eating flatworms on reef bum, and not a lot of people really were talking about it. I thought more people would be like, "Oh, is this a thing?" But I guess maybe because it's I guess I should explain. Fenbendazole is a dewormer. It's for flukes. Fish flukes tends to be the treatment. Maybe about 10 years ago, somebody discovered that fenbendazole kills purple clove polyps, which are kind of in that
Or the blue cloves
blue
that
clove
are, like,
polyps. Yeah.
if you ever had that, just throw away the tank. Just throw away.
No. Well, I mean, you don't throw away the tank. You put in fenbendazole. So how I discovered that fenbendazole kills acro-eating flatworms is I had treated a tank to treat those blue clove polyps, and at the time I had acro-eating flatworms, and within about 2 weeks, my acro-eating flatworms were gone. I couldn't find them on any piece I dipped. And then from that point on, I never saw them again. So I kind of deduced that maybe they're sensitive to that. So anyways, about a year ago, I was talking to Ray from Pirates Reef. And, I talked to him about this, and he's like, I know somebody that's got flatworms. And then he thought of this different way of approaching it was to add these fenben flakes, which have just a very low dose of this fenbendazole, as opposed to doing this, more heavy dose on a system, which
Like the powder.
And the powder form, there are things that are sensitive to it. It will kill certain things, which I can talk about. But I guess this low dose of just feeding these fish food flakes wasn't enough to affect anything in the tank, any of the inverts that might be affected by the more heavy dose. But it did eventually kill the flatworms, which is pretty interesting.
And I think it does have an impact on like Gargonians and leathers and
exactly.
stuff like that. So you might want to remove those.
Yeah, so that's the risk thing. And this is why I think sometimes, talking about the language of saying things with conviction versus, in theory, maybe this is how this works. I had heard somebody say, oh, these fenben flakes don't affect anything. And it's like, no, they definitely probably do affect things. If they're killing flatworms, they're affecting other things. So,
and the dosage is a pinch.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that
my hands are small, so my pinch is probably a lot smaller.
The other thing that concerns me about it is that if you're doing such a low dose, you're kind of maybe opening the door to create more of a superbug, because, maybe you are killing the majority of them, but maybe you're breeding some potentially stronger ones that, or you're breeding some immunity. Yeah. So, that's something that's a concern, but my understanding is they're pretty damn sensitive to it. And also fenbendazole, from the research and, the anecdotal information on the internet about treating these blue clove polyps, was that it actually stays in your rock and absorbed in your porous surfaces of your tank for up to a year or more. So people that treated for these blue clove polyps, they couldn't reintroduce anything. So if you wanted to put, say, Xenia, it's in that same Anthalia family. If you wanted to introduce that maybe a few months later, it might not survive. And there might be enough trace of that fenbendazole left to kill them. So,
so I did buy a bag of the flakes just to have on hand. You never know. I have a lot of things that I don't use, but I just have on hand just in case.
Yeah, and they're cheap.
Yeah, the whole bag was like $20 or something like that. And it'll probably last forever. But then, the flake version of it, there's people are asking, oh, the fish will eat it, right? What if they eat it all? Is their poop gonna contain kind of the medication that kind of absorbs into the water column, or do we just throw in the flake fluid at night?
So I think
dissolve in the water.
My theory on that is that because the chemical seems to be so resilient in terms of what I was saying about it, staying absorbed in surfaces over a long period of time, I think maybe it just goes through the fish's digestive system and just goes into the tank. I don't think it matters. I think it's just a blanket feeding thing. And, if it works, it works. But, I can share my experience with treating a whole system with the powder. It definitely works. And, I won't get in. I'm going to do an episode on pests sometime this year. It's going to be a big episode. That'll be a lot of work, but we really need an updated pest episode. But it does work on a whole tank, but you have to get as many snails out as possible. And any soft corals that I will say that zoas and mushrooms are fine. And almost any other kind of soft coral is going to be affected and probably completely melt and die, turn black and die.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the issue with my tank is I have tons of these feather dusters, tons of them. I would say probably 1,000 of them. These are not the little white ones we're talking about. These are tube worms.
Yeah.
And if those die,
that's a lot of
it'll just nuke my tank.
Well, I had a lot of tube worms in the overflows and stuff when I did this treatment. And let's see. I'm just trying to think, because this was a long time ago, but I didn't notice any of them die. And they're just the regular ones that'll just grow in your sump in your overflow. And some of them are bigger.
I don't think, they're it's like the tube worms that you can buy at the LFS. That's how big mine are.
Okay. Yeah. Like the Hawaiian feather duster kind of deal. Yeah.
They're huge. I don't know how they proliferated so much, but some condition made them breed.
Some people's hope with this treatment was that it would kill vermitid snails if you did it at a high enough dose.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. And I think it would work at a high enough dose, but you might be risking some other things at that point. That being said, I actually have that's a funny but sad story, and I hope this person doesn't mind me telling this. Of course, I'm not going to mention any names, but I had recommended for flatworm treatment the dose, and the person, instead of doing the dose of the per pill dose, they thought that each bottle was that many milligrams. So they added 2 entire bottles of fenbendazole pills, which I think are 212 milligrams or something each. Instead of adding 2 pills, they added 2 whole bottles to about a 200-gallon reef. And so they messaged me and they're like, yeah, the tank's still cloudy afterwards. What's going on? And I was like, how much did you add? And they're like, oh, the 2 bottles. I'm like, no, 2 pills, 212 milligram pills.
That reminds me of my buddy. Reef Nutrition sells these pods, right? They sell pods where you feed them as food, and then they sell live pods.
Yeah.
he bought a whole bottle of like the food version where they're all dead and
Oh,
dumped the whole bottle in his tank.
oh, sea
And
monkeys galore.
yeah,
Probably not. No, they wouldn't hatch, right?
no, these are just dead pods.
Yeah.
It's just a food,
Oh,
but he
okay.
dumped like you're supposed to put like a teaspoon of food in each
Hmm.
time
Oh, crazy.
bottle in.
Yeah. Jeez. Okay, so anyways, this tank did not immediately crash. I think what ended up happening, and the tank did eventually, he did lose a lot of the corals in this tank.
Yeah.
I think he probably could have saved it. I know he was out of town like directly after doing this, which is also don't
Yeah.
do any major treatment
Yeah,
on your
don't do
tank
any
before
major
you
changes.
leave.
Any changes.
Yeah.
We all know that things break
Yeah.
when
And
you're out of town.
I think one of the things that ended up happening, sometimes it's not the it's not the initial like event. It's the how the event plays out after. And in this case, I think there probably were a certain amount of snails that were dying, and then they probably started to decay, and there was ammonia spikes, and
That's the
things
domino.
things started to go sideways, and you probably would have to do like a, I don't know, like an 80% water change to get enough of that out.
It-
Yeah, it's a little bit sad, but it also went to show that you could actually dose a massive quantity, and it's not going to just completely kill the tank. The tank still has a chance
Right.
if you could totally
I still
overdose.
have time to correct it.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're home. The
Yeah.
thing is, like, if the flake food has a minute amount of it, what's the difference between that and just putting a little bit of the powder in versus
Yeah.
is it that much more diluted in the flake food that you can't match that with the powder?
It's true. I mean, I like also the flake food it's like, how do you even know how many milligrams or whatever you've added? There's no real like,
Right.
the data is extremely foggy. And when I did the treatment for the blue clove polyps that ended up killing my flatworms, I put in like such a small amount that I almost like thought it was like not going to do anything. I was like, I'm going to put in such a small amount that it's either going to do nothing or I'm going to notice something happen. And it
Right.
was like, it was maybe a 200-gallon system. This is my old place. And I probably put in like, I don't know, what's a Chemiclean spoon? It's like 0.3 cc's or something. It might have been like 2 or 3 Chemiclean spoons of the powder.
Yeah.
And that was enough to wipe out the flatworms and the blue clove polyps. So it's extremely potent stuff, and it's cheap. So
I'm sure that those blue clove polyps, when they died, you probably had to do a water change right away.
Yeah, I mean, those things, how those things can kind of take over a system too. They're pretty nasty, stupid looking
I've
things.
seen it. I've seen it, and it just kills everything in its path. It literally just goes over it.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there was probably a little bit of die off, but I don't recall it being enough, in that kind of water volume to actually lead to any major issues. But
Right.
yeah. Back in those days, I didn't do a lot of water changes. I don't know. I probably do a lot more than I used to.
Yeah, I have everything on like the Neptune dose. I do auto water changes.
Yeah.
I don't even think twice about it. Just make sure my bin is filled with
Yeah.
salt water.
How do you feel about the regular small water changes versus, a little bit larger ones less often? Do you think that there's more benefit to it?
I think so, because when you're doing large water changes, you're swinging the system one way or the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not matching the traces to the parameters exactly. They might be close,
Yeah.
but they're not exact. So to prevent any kind of crazy swings, that's why I chose to do the kind of the small auto water change method, and the fact that I don't have to do anything.
Yeah, that's fair.
Except for filling up the saltwater bin.
Yeah.
So it was out of convenience and out of what I thought was, less stress on the tank every time you do a water change.
Yeah.
And temperature matching and pH matching. There's a lot of variables.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we are kind of maybe potentially putting the system through a little tiny bit of stress every time we do a bigger water change. But, I was kind of proven wrong on this. I remember I was talking to Devin on Reef Dudes about this, and I was like, well, if you're doing these small ones all the time, then you're just water changing the water that you water changed. But apparently Apparently, BRS did a study on this years back, and they basically figured out that the re-water changed water is such a small percentage that it's basically negligible by the
Yeah,
time you wash it out into the whole system.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I think the system's large enough where like there's such a small amount of the new water that's taken out during the when the pumps run
Hmm.
that I think maybe you're losing some of the new water that you just put in, but
Yeah.
it's just such a small amount.
Yeah,
It
it's a
gets
small
diluted.
percentage. Yeah, totally, totally. Because when you, yeah, I think if you do the math on it, it is really, like I say, it's fairly negligible. So what are the size of the water changes then?
So I'm doing 5 gallons per day on
Okay.
my 240-ish gallon tank.
Hmm.
So that roughly equates to like a 20% water change every 2 weeks.
Yeah, but because 5 gallons a day, that's 50 gallons per 10 days. That's like almost 150 gallons a month of salt water. That's like a
Yeah,
bucket a month.
yeah,
But then again,
yeah,
that's what a lot of people are doing if you break it down, anyways, I
yeah.
suppose. Yeah.
It's whether I do the auto water change or I do it manually, I'm still going through the same amount of
Yeah, you're still going through about a bucket a
buckets.
month. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. It's something I might consider trying. I just would need an easy way to automate it, but I think I could
yeah,
probably do it.
yeah. There.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to use a system like the Neptune dose. All you really need is two accurate dosing pumps
Hmm.
that are calibrated.
Yeah.
Um, one's pulling and one's pushing.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Okay. That's a thing to consider. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else this year that I think implemented or really had any big takeaways from.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we did mention like the nutrients and all of the that and the nutrient testing
Yeah.
devices that are on the market today, like the Trident NP and the Maven that's coming out, right?
Yeah, well,
So
let's talk about some of the products that maybe some of them aren't 100% new to 2024, but they have had a chance to perform this year.
yeah.
So the Trident NP, I have heard, that it still seems early as far as that product's reliability. Where do you think it's at right now?
So and I think it's all software based, right? The hardware is no different than the original Trident.
Yeah,
Like the way it titrates and the way it operates, the innards are the same. It's all software. So at the beginning of the launch, there was a firmware update that fixed a lot of complaints, and after that firmware update, I haven't had an issue since on it. But reading through the forums and reading people's complaints about it, they seem to have a lot of issues with it, but I don't personally see that, and it's not because I'm sponsored by them or anything.
hmm
That's my experience with it, and honestly, it's been such a great tool for me to understand and see the trends of my nutrients throughout the week. That regardless of how accurate it's, as long as it's consistent,
yeah,
then I know that either my nutrients are going up or down. And that's all I use it for, right? Is the indicators. I don't care if it's super accurate or not.
yeah. Well, so what would you say you have learned about, the daily curve of nutrients from, observing the tests on this?
So I carbon dose in this tank. So whenever I'm carbon dosing, I can adjust the amount of carbon dosing liquid that I put in this tank, and so I can see it immediately 24 hours later. If I'm putting too much in and it's pulling out too much phosphate, then I'll lessen that, and I can control that.
Hmm.
And the cool thing is that maybe in the future we'll have the ability to auto dose nutrients as we auto dose 2-part or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. If we can be more trusting of auto dose,
Yeah, I
database
went into it
dosing.
now because there's a degree of accuracy that you have to have in order to auto dose. But
Yeah,
I mean, going back to the consistency part, like maybe you don't need it to be accurate, you just need it to be consistent, and you just have to understand that plus or minus whatever parts per million each test gives you.
yeah.
Equates to how much you dose for nutrients or carbon dose or whatever your method is.
Did you find that, based on the data and getting nutrients more, I guess, more stable across the board and sitting more consistently in that ratio, like you've seen better results in the tank?
Growth is a lot faster when
Yeah.
you have your nutrients consistently in the tank for them to uptake, right? Especially when it comes to carbon dosing, because it's converting the good bacteria. You're kind of gut loading the bacteria that the corals consume, and so if that's at a consistent place, you know that your corals are gonna grow faster.
Mm-hmm.
I before, when I'm just hand testing, there's just kind of indicator corals, right? That don't have a good color, don't have good extension anymore, and that's kind of telling you that your nutrients levels are a little bit out of whack. But why get to that point? Why put your corals through that?
That's true. Because for a coral to actually start to express, different symptoms or whatever, like you've already kind of gone too far. Yeah.
Right. So nowadays the tank is consistent. The corals are happy. I don't see those factors as much anymore, or at all, since I got the.
Okay. Well, that's a good. I think that's a good selling point for me, and obviously I like the Apex stuff, but I'm very interested in what CoralView is doing with the Maven, and they're sort of all-in-one tester. My only experience with their products is the wave engine, the 4-pump wave engine for my gyres, and I freaking love that thing. It's just like super great for programming. It takes a battery backup input. It's really nicely built. I remember I was talking to a CoralView rep like years ago on the phone, and he kept talking about, he's like, oh yeah, and then we dropped this in the tank and it was totally fine. And like his big selling feature was how you could drop everything in the tank. And it was water resistant. Yeah. But they seem to be built really well, and so far so good. So I guess something I was interested in this year was the Kraken, and it seems to be constantly sold out. But that was something that I had kind of essentially dreamed up, that a product like that would exist, because being a musician and a guitar player, I always had guitar pedals that had, I'd have like 10 pedals on my guitar pedal board, right, and you'd get a DC brick that would power all of your pedals off of one thing. I was like, why don't we have that for reef tanks? Why do I have freaking like 30 things plugged in for one tank when I can have, I guess maybe one of the risks with it is now you're relying on one piece of equipment to run all of those things. Point of
failure, right?
Yeah.
But then it is, you gotta look at on the plus side too, is that if you had the battery backup hooked up to it, well, I guess that would make sense, right? If that power brick dies, everything's dead.
Unless the battery backup, it depends on how it's wired, which part of the chain goes down, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, there's certain things, maybe like if you're running a lot of XR15s, you can run XR15s on those. You can't run the XR30s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought they were, I thought, I don't know a lot about the Hydro system or their ecosystem, but I thought they were only for pumps, but I guess it could power anything with a certain amount of.
Yeah, it's anything 24 volt. And then there's the 12 volt outputs too. So, but yeah, I mean, in theory, I think it's a really cool product. It just kind of streamlines and simplifies. And I think that every time you convert something from AC to DC, you're losing some efficiency. So the fact that you're doing it all in one shot, and then you're distributing that power out from there, it must be a much more efficient way to do it.
Yeah, and the control aspect of it too, right?
Yeah,
having one dashboard to look at everything. I think what CoralView is doing versus what Neptune's doing. It's good that they're both competing with each other. It just kind of has more innovation, I think, in the future.
Yeah. More competitive industry is going to make people have to step up their game and see what everybody else is doing. And you also mentioned Reef Factory is making some really good stuff too.
Yeah, Reef Factory is making some awesome stuff. They also have their automatic testers, and they also have ones that test nutrients as well. And I'd be pretty cool to kind of test those ones too. Like we can't just rely on all the big names.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll reach out to these guys because I'm not saying I'm pretty open to an equipment sponsor. I've got Fauna Marine for my my chemical side of the hobby, but we'll see.
The equipment side of having a sponsor is pretty nice. It definitely is the financial burden of all these expensive pieces of equipment is a lot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, that's a good segue into another note that we talked about. I don't know if it's in the notes, but I know what we had texted about it is, where are we at in 2024, going into 2025 for, the entry cost to be a marine hobbyist? What are things at? The coral prices, the equipment prices. What are your thoughts on it right now?
Well, like I said a little bit over texting you, is that obviously inflation has a lot to do with prices going up, and inflation based on that percentage and based on the percentage of salary increase for most jobs, they don't match. So everything seems to be going up and becoming more expensive.
Yeah, we're staggered. We're kind of the last ones to see the raise. We see the prices go up and then we get the raise later or whatever,
Yeah, and I know Jake from Reef Builders, in 2021 or 2020, there was a article that he wrote about, is the hobby too expensive for us to afford these days? But based on the inflation numbers and adjusting it from products that were available in the early 90s versus now, it obviously, if you're going for the brand name high end stuff, it's not going to match. But if you're just doing one-to-one, stuff that will maintain the tank and keep it alive, then the inflation and the price to get into it hasn't changed much since the early 90s.
Yeah.
So I think it's still affordable for the average Joe to get into this hobby. And there's a lot of companies that are producing things that make it easier for an entry level person to come. Like Tanks, like, has everything that you need to start with. You don't have to figure out buying individual pieces of equipment and just plug and play.
Yeah, totally. I think that, one of the things that, maybe a new hobbyist might look at some of the pricing of like the Ecotech stuff or the Neptune stuff, and they think that's what they need because they see a lot of it out there. It is fairly industry standard, but it's kind of intimidating because you go, oh, I want to use the lights that these guys are using because these guys have some of the best looking tanks. And then you kind of go like, well, that's just, nobody wants to spend $10,000 to get their first tank set up. So, I do think there are good other options out there. I'm using some of these products because, I do want to be standardized as an industry to an extent. I want corals to be grown in my systems that someone else can take to their system that is going to have fairly similar kinds of equipment to relate to. But I do worry that there's a bit of an intimidation based on the way things cost. But like you say, relative to inflation, I don't know. I think I would say that Ecotech in the last couple of years, the prices have really, to me, have not matched that. I think they're more. But I mean, you're sponsored by Ecotech, so I'm not going to push you on that one.
It's fine. I mean, the reality is that Ecotech is on the higher end of pricing.
Yeah, it's like the Apple. It's like the Apple of reef products.
It's based on preference. No one's forcing you to buy the most expensive equipment, but there's a lot of factors on social media and people telling them that that's the way to go. But in my opinion, if you're a newbie and you're looking into getting into this hobby, there's so many options out there today that can get you significant and successful results without having to spend top dollar.
Yeah, totally. I wish I had made a list
out there that they don't care. Money's not an option or not a thing to them. So they'll go out and they'll buy everything top tier.
Yeah. And that's great too, because that's an injection of finances into the hobby, and that keeps these companies, alive.
Keeps them innovating. Yeah. And that leads me into the other thing is we talked about like knockoffs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't agree with running knockoffs. They can have other designs and still be successful. While they're just knocking off because they see the ability to make money off of those because people see it as the same as the original.
Yeah, but I mean the thing is like the Ecotech MP40 versus the what is the Jabao ones.
Yeah, the DMPs. Is what
DMPs.
they named them.
Yeah, I mean, the MP40 was such a great design that at
Yeah,
some point, maybe patents aside, I think maybe there was a certain amount of years on that patent or something like that before
yeah.
anybody could copy it. Or maybe the Jabao one is actually illegal. Anyways, I think
Yeah,
actually maybe it's.
yeah. I probably don't know the legality
Yeah,
of what they're doing and stuff like that. But yes, there are certain designs where it's just really good.
it's
Like
just such a good design because,
yeah,
getting more electronics on the other side of the glass and not in the water is,
yeah.
the things
And
were.
aesthetically, it's
Yeah,
pleasing
yeah,
and it's nice.
yeah,
But yeah, then yeah, it's just one of those things where you're talking about a company that has invested all this R&D and all this money into a product already for someone to just kind of copy it.
yeah.
It's hard for that company to create more new things for the future because they're gonna be scared of someone knocking it off and them going out of business because of that.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean MP40 has been around for I think it's about 20 years now. I think
Yeah,
it's maybe
yeah.
2005 ish. Yeah,
I have
yeah,
a very, very old, like 15-year-old
yeah,
MP10,
yeah,
and it's still running.
yeah. I've got some of the old ones too, and that is a nice thing. You can still use the new QD wet sides on the old
Yeah,
ones. So
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like you say, it's like they've had 20 years of perfecting, and
yep.
essentially. And the funny thing is, they've only really changed the model really once
Twice.
or twice. Yeah, like
Yeah,
it's
they
barely.
added the
Yeah,
QD was one, and then they added the Wi-Fi.
yeah, yeah.
But
So
essentially, the controller and everything looks the same.
yeah, it's a great product. So I mean, I'd be curious to see how these DMPs kind of perform long term. But in my experience, like I buy things that are built to last, and maybe long term. Also just from a
Yeah,
consumer wasteful level, like I want to buy something that I know is gonna last long term. So, I mean, yeah, if anybody has experience with these DMPs for, I don't know if they've even been out a year now, so maybe we'll see.
it's been out for a couple of months. I think
Yeah,
I see pictures of them from like a long time ago, but I'm probably sure that they couldn't release it
yeah, yeah,
until now. But yeah, we'll see long term how they last. And
yeah.
the argument is like, even if they don't last, I'll buy another one because it's still cheaper than buying one Ecotech version or
Yeah.
whatever.
See, that's what I don't like from a, consumer, just a human standpoint of, replacing things made of plastic that are shipped from
Yeah,
overseas, like I don't feel good about that in my soul, which is another thing, talking about, having salt produced in North America versus being imported would be, nice to see more products like that too.
right. And I wonder if that will that keep the price the same or will that lower it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, things are going to change coming up here. I'm even worried a little bit about what's going to happen with Canada and the U.S. as far as our
Yeah.
trade agreement. We may because Ecotech stuff is made in the States. Is it going to be harder for us to get it? Are the prices going to go way up in
I
Canada?
mean, we
I'm not
just
sure.
got a new president that is probably going to impose some new policies on import and tariffs and stuff like
Hmm.
that. So I don't know what 2025 will come
Yeah,
in this hockey.
yeah, we'll see. I guess. Yeah, that president guy you guys got. Yeah, I know about that guy. Yeah. Oh, another product actually I wanted to ask you about, and I'll let you go soon because I know you're a bit under the weather and you've got
Oh, no
probably
worries.
family
I
to
can
get
talk
back
forever.
to. Yeah. There's a couple things actually I wanted to talk to you about photography and stuff, but let's just save that for another time because I'd be super happy to have you
Yeah,
back.
that'd be awesome. That'd
Yeah,
be cool.
yeah, because we had
Yeah,
a lot of notes there, and I think it'd actually be a good just single episode to do that. So
oh yeah, the
yeah,
photography thing is like it's like a niche within a niche
yeah,
because like saltwater hobby is already a niche, and then you're layering on top photography, which is a whole nother ball game. And I'd love to talk about it because
yeah.
that's kind of like what I love to do.
Yeah, no, that's one of your specialties. So I don't want to just like talk about it for 5-10 minutes. I want to give it some
Yeah,
time. So let's do that another time. But yeah, my last question was about the AI blades. You have blades on your tanks, right?
yeah. So you can see
Yeah,
them right there.
yeah, yeah. So how do you feel about them? I have a couple that are in the boxes and they're going to go on the new system, but I just wondered if you had any recommendations for
I think you're gonna
starting.
love them.
Yeah,
The they blanket the whole entire tank with light. And so it's really nice to have that.
Speaking of light, yeah, they're listening.
They just turned on. So the fusion and the blanket of light is really good. And if you're planning on putting them over your tank, I have a buddy. His name is Tony. IG is like neon, 3D neon, and he makes these brackets for the blade so that you can actually swivel them.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So you can. So now they're directional as well.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that's good.
So
I'll put. I'll get in contact and maybe see a link. I know that I liked
all sorts of. Yeah, it makes all sorts of brackets for every type of light.
Is it the same guy that's doing stuff with Elliot from Golden State Corals? Yes. Okay. Absolutely. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'll put a link in the description. Again, this is something I'm super big on because I love using 80/20 for mounting my lights. 80/20s.
Oh, we can go on with 80/20 all day long. I love 80/20.
Yeah, but yeah. So the blades, would you say? Because what people have told me is they're a little bit like almost like little clusters of Radion diodes, essentially.
Yeah, they're like
AI
little clusters
diodes.
of like three LEDs. I think so. Yeah, they're like little clusters every so far apart. But as far as how strong they are, you can literally run just the blades, as your primary lights.
Yeah.
You don't. I mean, I have them as supplements, but literally I can just run them with just the blade.
Yeah, crazy. Okay, so I'm gonna be putting them on in place of some OR3s, and I think maybe I'll start them at a lower output, in the beginning, just to be kind of careful. Yeah.
If you have a par meter, it'll be easier to adjust.
Yeah. No, I don't. I specifically chose to not own a par meter because it's not something I want to get obsessed on. So I have a friend with a par meter. That's my that's what
it's just one of those things where you just use it once or twice and then you're done with it.
Yeah, totally. I think, I even like a suggestion for that would be if you are in a community where you have, a few other reefers that, are part of your reef group in a city, all pitch in and just pass it around,
Yeah, absolutely. It's good setting up new tanks too, because like you kind of don't want to overpower your lights and grow algae and stuff.
Totally. Yeah, cool. Well, I think we kind of went through most of our year-end notes. There was a couple things I wanted to talk about that are maybe not super important, but we can discuss another time. So, anything else to kind of maybe end the year or mention, moving into next year? Any final thoughts or anything?
I mean, there's a couple other topics that we can continue next time too, and that's like on the state of where we are with trade shows.
Okay.
Like that would be a pretty cool topic to go over, and how it's changed over the years and how they could potentially disappear.
Yeah. Well, and it's, I mean, that's more of a part of the culture in the US. We don't really have trade shows in Canada. We have like a couple, but, they're out east in Toronto, and typically it'd be nice for me to go, but it's
kind of far.
It's kind of far, and it's like usually they're a time of year that it's not even nice to be there. So rather just stay here in our temperate climate over in, Western Canada. But so okay, interesting. Well, hopefully that is not something that's threatened, coming up, but we can definitely talk about that.
Yeah. And then, just the fact that this year alone, I met so many people and friends and stuff in the industry that I think 2025 is going to be crazy. Just partnering with people and having, when we were talking about like beginners and starting up, the cost of starting up a reef tank is that if we have the right community in different locations where we can trade corals, where we can aquaculture corals and help these new people out, and I think that would just kind of help the industry a little bit. Not on the equipment side, but I'm talking about like the livestock part of it. Because livestock is getting, in my opinion, more and more expensive as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I agree. Like, if there are new hobbyists like in my area that are, just want some tester corals or whatever, I'll just give them some stuff, because I want them to succeed. I want them to be inspired and to, and like you say, that sense of
tester
community.
corals to them is like, wow, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll do some fragging, and there'll even be some like frags that are like, nice corals, but it's just like the shape of the way it was cut was like, I'm not gonna sit and watch this grow for 3 months before it looks like an okay frag. I'm just gonna toss it. But some of this stuff I'd give it away. Like it's just But yeah, I think what you're saying is the community is a huge part of it, and helping each other out, and maybe the trade shows are obviously a big backbone to connecting people too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, something that's kept me inspired in the last year, because I've had some little burnout periods, but doing this podcast and having conversations like this have just kind of kept me, fired up, because like you
learn something new every time you do a podcast or something from someone.
Yeah. And sometimes you're just kind of fishing for like a few little tips of just something new, but that's enough, and sometimes that's worth it, so. Yeah. We can. There's a lot of topics too, right? And especially when you like the burnout part of it. Yeah.
You mentioned there's definitely periods of time where I just felt like I just couldn't move forward. I like when you have a family to take care of and all these other responsibilities financially as well, and it's just hard. But talking to your friends and having that like community really helps. Keep you going.
Totally. Yeah. No, burnout is it's a thing, but especially when it's your business, it's sometimes it's just like, got to keep these things alive, and I'm not, And
I have a lot of friends that own businesses in the industry, and they just are seeing a decline this year in sales and stuff like that. But I don't know. Hopefully 2025 will be a lot better year.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. And just, I mean, I'm in a fairly small city, but I saw 2 like hardcore new hobbyists this year that are, guys that are, a little more like closer to middle age that have, successful businesses or whatever. And they just went and bought all the toys and, bells and whistles for their tanks. So it's cool. It's like, okay, there are people doing new setups that are getting into the hobby. So yeah. For sure. Yeah. Okay, man. Well, it's super awesome to talk to you finally. And, let's do this again. Cause definitely, I feel like we could have talked for 4 hours. So
for sure. There's a lot of other topics. There's another topic that, someone mentioned to me was like, when you start getting sponsorships and stuff like that, does that add to the stress?
Yeah.
Or is that, something that doesn't add stress, and that's a whole nother.
I guess it depends on the requirement. I'll just say briefly that in case anybody's wondering kind of what I get from Fauna Marine or whatever, like Claude said immediately, he said, I have no rules. He's like, you do whatever you want.
That's awesome.
And I was like,
most of my sponsors are very cool. And they just kind of let me do my thing.
That's cool. Yeah, totally. And I mean, I try to be consistent with my releases, but every once in a while there's a week where I didn't really have a guest lined up, and it's kind of just things are going on in life, and I'm not gonna. I think that's it's sad to see Reef Bum discontinuing, but I get it. It's like once a week for 4 years, like finding those guests, like trying to stay inspired.
I was glad to be on one of his shows. Where he closed up, but it was sad to see him go.
Yeah, totally. So that's a sad asset to be missing. But we're gonna see Keith around quite a bit still. I'll have him on the show at some point. I'm gonna interview him, make him feel uncomfortable. I'll ask him weird questions. I'll go deep.
He's probably on a mountain skiing somewhere.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. All right, man. Cool. Well, I'll let you go for the day, but definitely let's arrange to do this again in a few months or whatever. It'd be great.
For sure.
Yeah.
Adam, it's been my pleasure. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, man. Okay. Feel better. Take care.
Thanks, man. See ya.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this year-end wrap-up. I hope everyone had a great year in reefing. Thank you to everyone again for supporting this podcast. I couldn't do it without all of your support and great encouragement. Make sure you follow Peter's Instagram at bayarea_reef. Same for his YouTube. Check out some of his tutorial videos and great content that he creates. Just another shout out to our sponsor, Fauna Marine. So many great products by this company. I use a lot of them in my systems. Otherwise, I wouldn't have them as a sponsor. Just a reminder that I am a certified ICP consultant for Fauna Marine. So if you want to have your results analyzed or just go over a general issue in your tank, you can go to my Patreon at patreon.com/beyondthereefpodcast. If you have any suggestions for future guests, want to ask me a question, or just reach out in general, you can email me at beyondthereefpod@gmail.com. And if you're looking for high-quality aquacultured corals in Canada, please go to my website at fraggarage.ca. Hope to hear from you soon.